John Allen.
Here.
Cody Banks.
Here.
Donald Brown.
Here.
Joseph Hannigan Jr.
Here.
Allison O'Boyle.
Here.
William Renster.
Here.
Marjorie Sperry.
Here.
Suzanne Van Sciver.
Here.
Kyle Winkles. Larry Winkles.
Here.
These folks out in the hall can't hear anybody.
Do we need microphones and speakers? We have all the way down.
That's okay.
What's the matter, guys? You got 75 people. That's fine.
I'd like to move into the Native American Advancement Corporation application, number 2023-03. So, are you here this evening on the Native American application? Folks sitting here, okay, just, sorry,
We're here as planning residents, listening to our planning.
okay, my point is that they're going to put up a PowerPoint presentation using that wall over there, so some folks can clear out. So
It's just by the clock.
Just by the clock.
It's just by the clock.
You guys are.
You guys are fine. I think
Yeah, just right there.
it's just right there. I think that should be good. Okay.
Okay, for the board's purpose, just to frame. Don, could you recuse yourself from this?
Yes, I recuse myself from this portion.
Could you step in? Thank you. Okay, just to frame the issues and then we'll turn it over to the applicant. What this matter is, I mean, most matters that we have before the planning board are applications for development. This, on the other hand, is an appeal from the zoning official's decision to deny a permit to the applicant. The applicant is the Native American Advancement Corporation. They made an application to have a house of worship use. They had also proposed in their application some other activities. I'm not going to list them all, but things like lecture hall, museum, demonstrations, seminars, tours, campouts, various activities. The zoning official ultimately determined that this would require a conditional use approval, that houses of worship are conditionally permitted uses in the zone. Mr. Horner, the board's solicitor, concurred with that opinion, issued a written opinion indicating that this would require a conditional use permit. The fact that similar, or perhaps almost the same type of uses had been occurring in the past did not exempt the applicant from coming before the planning board or the zoning board for conditional use approval. So with that general overview of what the issue is, I think at this point it would be appropriate to turn it over to the appellant to make this presentation.
Hi, I'm Heather Coomer, an attorney for the Native American Advancement Corporation. I'm from Watershed Legal Group, that's our law firm name. And for everybody that's here for the warehouse, we're all gonna learn something today. This is all a learning lesson, so I'm hoping that you guys can come away with this with an appreciation of the history of this area, and we can, hopefully resolve this issue. So as the council, we're gonna have a lot of maps up here, so just stay with me here. So what we're talking about is the purpose of the application, just what the attorney said, is that what we did was that for the continued use of an existing house of worship that was formerly used by the Morning House Fellowship Church and was to be used as the Cohanzick Longhouse Indigenous Cultural Sanctuary, intended for the existing house of worship. That you might have heard the council say something about a museum or a lecture hall or things like that. That was a previous thing, which we also disregarded that when we did file the application and when we did file the letter, so I just want to correct that on the record. But we're going to address those issues as well. So we are not proposing a warehouse or anything like that. And this is really, I'm sorry, I'm not used to like having this on here, so I'll try to be loud. So this is like really what I find to be a teachable moment for us. Because when you think about houses of worship, they think mainly behind like the Judeo-Christian, maybe a mosque or, you know, what people normally think of. You don't think of the indigenous cultural sanctuary from the Nanatucket Lenape. But that's what we're here today. So we're not, this is by no means to say like, oh my God, the zoning officer is completely wrong, the attorney at the town is wrong. Saying is that we want to just correct this issue, because even though this is a very old practice, way before our country was founded, for their religion, it is a house of worship. And how many times do you get to say that the Native American sanctuary is going up all the place, like many churches? It's very rare. And it's very easy to make a confusion of what a house of worship is, how that fits in, and it's not, we understand that that's why it got denied, because of what people normally think of that Judeo-Christian type of thing, and not what we think of as the Cohanzick Longhouse Indigenous Cultural Sanctuary. So what we're going to do with this is going to go through the history of the property, then I'm going to go through like some zoning arguments, and I'm just going to explain this to you guys, as well as the definition of how we came to be that we don't need it to go in front of the board, because this is a continuing use. Much like when you buy, all it is a change of ownership. We're not changing anything with the building. We're not changing anything whatsoever. All you are is a change of ownership. That is it. Much like if you were to buy a house, do you have to go in front of the planning board because you were a new owner? No. If you have a restaurant that was formerly a pizza place that suddenly has become a Chinese food restaurant, do they have to go in front of the planning board? No. So that's what this is about, is that, no, they do not have to go in front of the board to go through this whole conditional use and site plan process, and a lot of people say, well, what's the big deal about having the conditional use or site plan approval? I don't understand. It's expensive. I don't know if anybody else has ever done anything on their property, getting surveys, architectural work, or having to go through board meetings and going for the professional. It's very costly here. And also, this is the United States of America. We have freedom of religion, and every religion should be treated equally, regardless if this is an indigenous cultural sanctuary run by the Nanatucket Lenape, or if it's a Christian church, what it used to be with the Morning Star Fellowship Church. That's what we're talking about here. And that's what this whole approval is about, what our appeal is, what we're asking for. Can we go to the next slide? So just for the property overview, we have 64 acres, mainly wooded, green acres, preserved land, and then you have this existing structure, which is 7,915 square foot structure, which has always been a house of worship. There is, again, no expansion of the structure, no structural changes are proposed, and no exterior changes to the structure is proposed at all. So next slide. And when we talk about this sanctuary, and this is, it's a sacred space for practicing their traditional spiritual religious rituals, ceremonies, gathering, fostering this deep connection between nature and their spiritual beliefs. That is how they do a house of worship. Now, why do we call it a cultural center? Or things of that, when there's cultural elements there? Well, we're going to go a little bit more into it, but houses of worship have a very broad structure, which is anything that's really dependent upon the house of worship, which is included with that. And that's why, for example, you see, when you say event spaces, how many churches have, an event space for a wedding hall? Or have like a library for office spaces for their priests, or, a rabbi, or whatever. That is a common thing, and that's what we're talking about here. It's also because the history and the rarity of the Native Americans in this land, for the Nanatucket Lenape Nation, it's important for them to share this culture, to share the information so we don't lose it, and to share the history, because that's how you're going to preserve everything. If we don't share it, they don't share it to everyone, how is this going to be preserved? How are you going to learn about this? It's going to die if you don't learn about it. So this is why when we're saying there's all these educational information, that's what we're talking about here. Next. Okay, so we're gonna go through the history of the property. So before this property was purchased by the Living Word Ministries, it was purchased by Boots and Saddles Riding Club in 1981. So that's when you had the big acreage there. And then around 1991 is when they started. We're going to go through those imageries there, but this is just like this quick overview. And then, unfortunately, in 2006, the church was destroyed by fire. And then a construction permit was issued for the demolition of the existing church structure, the ruins, unfortunately, of it. But they then about in 2007, the zoning officer issued approved to rebuild the church, and actually it doubled in size. And in 2008 was construction issued for it, church was built, then Living Word Ministries and sells it to the Morning Star Fellowship, and then the Morning Star Fellowship sells it to the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, as well as the Native American Advancement Corporation in August 2023. This was used with Green Acre funds, again, preserving nature, preserving that integrity, the history of everything. Now, during all these approvals, during the Living Word Ministries, they never went to the board meeting. They never had to go to a board meeting. But suddenly, we have to go to the board meeting for this. And that's what we're talking about. Next slide. All right, so we're gonna go through a little bit of history. Going back in time, this is 1970. So you can see what this property used to look like. Kind of see there's a small structure here. Next slide. Then it shows like 1972, you had like the church being built there. Next one. Really nothing came about, really no sort of improvement came about until a parking lot was added in 1991. You can see it right over there kind of with that. Next. And then, let's see what year is that? 2022. Okay, 2022, this is before the fire. So you can see the existing structure there. You can see the parking lot. That is existing church for the Living Word. Next one. And then this was the measurements of how big that church was. So it was perimeter, that was the acres of just that building. So you can see in 2002, that was before the fire. Next slide. This was the fire that was destroyed by the church. And Quinton Township was great because they were able to help the church rebuild, which was super important. And this was in 2006. Again, they didn't have to go in front of the board. Next slide. That was the prior remains. You can see that in 2007. That was when they issued the permit to demolish that existing structure. There you go. You can see that permit for demolition. So you saw it there. Didn't have to go in front of the board. No board approval necessary for this. Next slide. Then after this fire, it increased almost double the size for it. So increased after the fire. Guess what? Didn't have to go in front of the board. Next slide. You can see how it increased there. So it's at the afterwards. So this is the 2019, went to 385 feet. That was before. So you can see the difference. Can you do the before one?
Side by side.
Sorry, side by side. You can't really see it, but you can? Okay, that's good. So you can see it doubled. Again, they never had to go in front of the board at all with this. Okay, and this was the layout over here. So I just want to point out, this is this lecture hall. This was the church. This is the sanctuary. These are the rooms. They even had a library here. They had a kitchen. All these rooms. All for the church. You can see the bathrooms, commercial kitchen, everything that. This is the same exact layout that my client is using right now. Same one. They're not demolishing any sort of interior whatsoever. So this is what was approved. They got the zoning permits, were able to get the CO, and did not have to go in front for the board approval at all. Next slide. So this is what I'm going to, is that just in general, we're putting up the zoning ordinances here from here, is that anytime there needs to be any sort of structure, any sort of, you have to get an approval of development unless you're exempted. So we fall into the exemptions. Next one. this is the exemption. Proposed development not involving, change of use and not affecting existing circulation, building arrangement, landscaping, buffers, lighting, and other considerations are exempt. Everything is exempt. But yet, we stand here today. That is the problem here. We're not changing anything with this. Nothing is being changed. It's just the change of ownership. So according to this, we should be exempt from all these approvals. Unfortunately, that was denied, so that's why we're here. But again, we're trying to make this a teachable moment, because how often do you see a Native American sanctuary being built anywhere? Forget just even New Jersey, anywhere. It's a rarity, and that's why it's so important. Next. So this is the ordinance this is the zone we're in. We're in the rural density residential. So underneath that residential density, underneath the PBR, rural density residential zoning district, the church is allowed under conditional uses. That's what they're at. That is what the zoning officer said, that we would have to go to come here to get a approval for a conditional use to approve a church that was already existing, a house of worship that has not changed at all, and it's just a change of ownership. So this was what what they would like us to require. Next. Okay. The other thing that was brought about is conservation and nature preserve. Now, the 64 acres, those existing trails, because remind you, this was a horse riding area. These trails have already existed since, 1970s, whatever the riding place was there. And this is a permitted use, conservation areas. Yet my client was told they are not permitted there, which is bonkers. So instead of celebrating new moon ceremonies, inviting Boy Scouts there to learn about the environment and about the culture, they have been forced to not have that. We're not even allowed to have them go outside. We were denied. To even have a trail, they said you have to get a CO for outdoors because of the trails. How insane is that? And I tried to be like teachable moment, but for a CO for what? A trail outside? So, and also, the truth is, this is permitted. Next. Okay, so we talk about houses of worship, uses related. So this is what we wanted to get into, because there is, what they said was the libraries, the museums, anything like that. So those are actually like permitted uses underneath the zoning district. However, so they said because you had all these different, uses under here, you're going to have to go in front of that. Again, anything related to a house of worship is considered encompassing all of that. That's just exactly why I don't know if anybody's been to a museum at a church. I have. There was one, I live in Mercer County, and there's a great one, the Sourlands. But they're there because we're very privileged to live in an area that's so historic, that there's such history, like Revolutionary War museums in a church. Especially growing up in Monmouth County, they had that there, You got to see who was buried, and it was an active church. Those are things that exist, and guess what? It was never considered a separate use. Next. Okay. So now we're going to get into the Religious Land Use Institutional Persons Act. So this is a federal law here, and it's basically saying that you can't treat other religions differently. They all have to be treated similarly here. The government can't impose or implement any land use regulation in a manner that imposes a substantial burden on one religion as opposed to the other. Now you can see here this entire time, Morning Star Church, Living Word Ministries Church, never had to get any sort of approvals whatsoever. Yet, as soon as we put in to open up so they can have Boy Scouts there to do tours and everything, suddenly, and the new moon ceremonies and all the other spiritual stuff they would like to do there, they're denied and have to go to a very rigorous and expensive process for a conditional use and site plan approval. The other thing they said, and the reason why I put religious exercise as defined, because this is where it comes with these overlapping uses here. Any exercise of religion, whether or not compelled or in general, is general to the system of religious belief. The use of building or conversion of real property for religious use, exercise entity intends to use property for that purpose. What you can translate that, translate that saying, if it's for the religion, then it's covered by the religion as a house of worship. End story. That's it. It's not like you're going to get separate uses here. It's not like you're going to have a church being like, okay, I have to go in front of the zoning board to get an event space here because people want to have their weddings there. You never see that. Sometimes you have Sunday schools. Do you ever see anybody have an approval for a Sunday school? No, because they're essential for the church. It is very common to have that, and they're not considered separate uses. So that's why we're here today. I don't know why religious land use was always coupled with Institutional Persons Act. It seems like a bizarre combination to me, but that is the law here right now. So, gonna go. Okay, and then again, this kind of reiterates the same thing. It's the maximum extent permitted by the terms of the statute and the Constitution, meaning that they're allowed to practice however they practice. That is for their religion, how they feel that is for their house of worship. End story. This is not being like, oh my God, I have to go get a museum or a lecture hall. I don't know if you saw the previous slide there, but of the layout of the church, they had a giant lecture hall there, but you know what other people call that? Just where the preacher preaches. That's it. That is it. It is just a different type of religion than we're used to. And we understand that, and that's why I keep on saying this is a teachable moment. Because honestly, look, I'm a white girl. I know I'm not Native American, and I had to do a lot of research and everything like that. But this is what you have to learn. It's very easy to not know this because it's not common knowledge. It's the hidden past. I always like to say hidden in plain sight, because a lot of people are like, there's still Native Americans around. The guys are like, yes, and this is why we need this, because we have to teach future generations as well. We need to preserve this of their history and this culture and this religion, and they should have the right to do so without any substantial burden. The fact that the ministry the church was not allowed, did not have to, even for the change of ownership from Living Word Ministries to Morning Star, they didn't have to go in front of the board for conditional use. And by the way, that zoning for the conditional use for house of worship has been in existence the entire time for that, I believe. So it's not like all of a sudden this is a new sort of requirement. No, it's been there, but they're being treated differently. And again, we understand that this is new for everybody. So that's why I keep on saying a teachable moment, because I don't want to accuse anybody for doing anything. It's very, if you don't know about it or don't know the history, which is exactly why the sanctuary should exist, it would be easy to misunderstand that and misconstrue what this actually means and what they're asking for. So I think that's the other thing I want to say here too, just to kind of add on here, is that this building, so even if, say, they decided that this is a non-conforming building because it was never, approved by the board, it still is allowed to be there. It still doesn't need to go in front of the board, because as long as you're not increasing or you're not changing anything or you're not changing the use or anything like that, you don't need to. So that was in their own ordinance. Next one. And this is just like the non-conforming uses. Now, mind you, it's hard saying non-conforming uses here because it is an allowable use. Just right now, it's a conditional use. So, but even if it was considered a non-conforming, and when I say non-conforming uses, it means like, I like the example of like, you have a bar that's been there, since the 1950s, and now it's something, the area has changed and they don't allow bars there, but that bar is still existing. That would be considered a non-conforming use. So it's not like they're gonna tell the people, you gotta go. It's kind of like grandfathered in. Doesn't matter if there's a change of ownership at all. Only thing matters if you're expanding it, increasing it, or discontinuing that use in any sort of way. They've not, and it hasn't been a year, It's this, they got this property August last year. It's May right now. So even that, it still falls into the non-conforming uses, again, which are also protected and may be continued indefinitely. So all we were asking here is for them to continue the use that is permitted there of the house of worship, the existing use, without having to go for a conditional use or a site plan, which is not necessary, nor, it's not even not necessary, it's not required. Next. So my conclusion is that nothing in either the Clinton Town Code or the MLUO, which just stands for the Municipal Land Use Law, provide an exemption to the protection of a change of ownership. Meaning, this applicant is purely a new owner with the intention of continuing the existing use in the existing structure, and which has been there for multiple legal approvals over a span of 2 decades, and they just want to continue that. That's all they want to do. And that's all we're asking for. And that's it. Thank you.
Just some questions from council.
Sure.
Just to kind of understand the limits or the contours of the arguments that you made. Are you contending under the Religious Land Use Act, and I'll just use that as the short version of it, that a religious organization never has to come before a planning board or a zoning board for, say, a site plan board?
No, I'm saying that if a church this entire time on the same property, they have to be treated equally. That another religion can have a substantial burden that's unequal to the other religion. So in this case, the fact that the church has received all these approvals, have not gone in front of the board, and they were treated like that, that my client or any sort of religion would be treated the same. That's what I'm saying.
So, a religious organization may be required, depending upon the circumstances, to come before a planning or zoning board, either for a use variance or conditional use or site plan.
Yes, if it was, say for example, the ministry, there was a Ministry of Living Services, and at that point the board was just saying that you need to go in front of there. I honestly can't go back 2 decades, but the fact that it went from the change of ownership from the Living Word to Morningstar without any sort of trigger that would require a conditional use zoning, and the use is not changing at all, that my client should be treated the same way, as well as the fact that according to the ordinances separate from like the federal law, that they're not required to. They're part of that exemption.
A number of times along the way in your presentation, you said that prior applicants never had to go before the board. You had looked at.
Yeah, we
You
did.
actually analyzed the township code back in the beginning.
Yes.
And that at all times it has been the same as it is tonight.
Yeah. I honestly think that, look, I'm sure it was devastating 2006 when the church burned down. And, Quinton Township was doing the right thing to heal the community and heal that congregation. I'm sure that had something to do with it, but that's what happened.
Prior owner of the property had both the house of worship use as well as the daycare use.
What I saw was a house of worship. With the daycare, it looked like they did apply, but it never went to the board or anything like that. That is what we found in our OPRA. We're not asking for a daycare service. So honestly, that was not important to this. We were only focusing on the house of worship here.
But you would agree with me that the prior use of the property had a combined house of worship and daycare center.
Well, I would say that it's not like the daycare. I don't know the particulars of that daycare, and also that daycare didn't go for approval at that point, and I don't know if it was aligned with the religious. I don't know if it was like a Sunday school or anything like that because I wasn't there. I wasn't their attorney.
I hear commentary. There's an opportunity for public portion, but only one person speaks at a time.
Are your microphones turned on?
The microphones are for recording purposes only, not amplification
Speak up a
purposes.
little, please.
You would agree with me that, at least in your application materials that were presented to the zoning official, that you did bring up things like the research center, the library, tours, camping, campouts, outdoor adventures.
Well,
Let me just finish that question. But you did bring up all of those kinds of activities that were going to be conducted at the property.
Well, first off, I actually did write, when we put in our zoning letter, we didn't do that, that was before we were hired. We also put in our zoning letter to disregard the previous communication because this was started anew. So, and we have it in the communications as well, it's in our letter if you want to see it, but we did say that. And additionally, as far as, again, with whatever is considered part of the religion as well, that is open. The courts have decided, I believe it was a Ramapo, that because Native American religion is so entwined with nature and the cultural, it's one and the same, that it's different. Who am I to say that you have to worship a certain way or something is excluded for their portion of house of worship? Who are we to say that?
I guess that's what I wanted to kind of clarify, is your argument that, one, you've abandoned all of these activities, or two, is it that all of these activities that were mentioned in the first application subsumed in with the religious practices of this organization?
Right now, it's as far as our application, it's just continuing to house of worship. Those activities underneath, just like I wouldn't go to a church and be like, you have to go get a zoning permit for a school or go in front of the board for a Sunday school, I wouldn't ask anybody to define what they believe is intrinsic to their religion and their cultural practice, especially one that frankly is, I don't even want to say it's endangered, but how many sanctuaries of Native Americans that you find around here?
Again, I guess the purpose of my question is just to understand exactly what your application is, because at least some of these things were brought up, and then it becomes unclear whether they've been either abandoned as part of the activities, or alternatively, is what you're saying that they are part and parcel of the exercise of this religion. And to just use the one example you have, like, if a church decides to operate a school, say whatever church, pick your favorite church, wants to operate a K through 8 school here in the district. Are you saying that they do not have to come for any kind of use approval?
I didn't say that.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
No, I didn't say that. All we were asking for is the continued use.
Let me finish my question. You did state in your argument that a school is something that would be part and parcel of the
Sunday school, we all understand.
Sunday school is pretty personal. I haven't seen churches ever go in front of boards for Sunday schools, and I would say that's pretty paramount to their religious practice. Again, who am I to say how people worship? Also, this has been litigated throughout the state, and not even Native American, I mean all different sorts of religion. And there's a reason why there is even a religious land use and institutionalized persons act. It's because of what you're asking me right now, and this is why it's there. Is to prevent, again, who are we to say of how you're supposed to, what is intrinsic to your religion? How are we supposed to say that?
I don't think anybody's questioning that. I'm trying to understand exactly what your application is, what you're asking us to do as the property.
You're just asking to continue the existing house of worship. That is it.
Then without all these other activities?
If those activities are part of their house of worship, if you have a disagreement with that, then the proper form of that is a zoning violation, not to preempt it prior to even having them open up. That's what we're talking about. If the board decides, okay, this is not intrinsic to your religious practice, then you have to handle it like anything else. That's why zoning violations exist.
Well, I guess that's really the issue. Maybe that's the crux of it, is that the board is not sitting here trying to decide what is or is not part of religious practice. It's incumbent upon the applicant to make a complete disclosure of what it intends to do at the property so it can be properly determined as to whether this is something that requires approval or potential site plan, or whether, I'm not even finished my question, or whether it's something that needs site plan approval or not.
They're not changing the use, it's a house of worship. That's it. That is it. It's a house of worship. That's it.
So without all these other activities,
I mean, I don't know. I guess I have to ask the church if they have to go in front of the board for a Sunday school. Look, I'm not one to tell what is intrinsic to like a person's religion. I am saying what we're here for is a continued use. Again, if the board or the township has an issue with any sort of activities that go on, again, that is for what zoning violations are for. It's not to preempt it beforehand, before they're even allowed to open up and worship. They've missed a lot of different ceremonies, their own religious ceremonies, so far during this entire process. They're not building a warehouse.
How will be approved?
yes, sure.
Okay. If everyone could be quiet, okay? This was an article that was written in a paper, and Mark Quiet Hawk Gould and his daughter Jacinto, and Jacinto is here, and as you know, her brother is here, okay? In which this is what he stated. He stated, the NAAC works to advance Native American interests, promote self-sufficiency, and preserve the culture. It focuses on charitable, educational, and service-oriented programs. It provides employment, training, financial literacy, and fosters home ownership. Other services include weatherization for homes of low-income families, replace heating units, connecting people to fuel and water rebate programs, and working with the state to identify households with lead paint exposure. Jacinto, a real estate agent, children's book author, and entrepreneur, said she teaches people financial literacy with a goal of home ownership. The reserve will give her a chance to expand the NAAC's educational reach, she said. She already has a booklet of plans ready to go once they receive township approval. While touring the church's spacious interior, Jacinto said the group's plan to launch indigenous conservation educational programs that will allow the general public, including school children, to learn about Native peoples through hands-on experience, workshops, and tours. The hope is to foster a sense of environmental stewardship through programs designed to teach about Native plants and their uses. The church, complete with a full kitchen, has been vacant for a few years, but it is relatively new with a row of offices that could serve as a welcome area, educational space, research area, conference room, and library of historical books. She is working with Down Jersey Folk Life Center at Wheaton Arts in Millville to create displays for the museum. But Jacinto said she's hoping for donations from people, businesses, and organizations for planned initiatives. So when you said that you didn't, or maybe it wasn't your law firm that did ask it, okay, but when they contacted the zoning officer, what they did say is exactly what Mr. Coe had reiterated, was that they were asking for, okay, use the property as a lecture hall, museum, visitor center, research center, library, and indoor-outdoor educational space for programs, workshops, demonstrations, seminars, tours, lectures, performances, exhibits, festivals, guided hikes, campouts, outdoor adventures, and other gatherings involving visitors and other members of the public, including school and community groups, okay? And it all may be in which it's all related to their Native American, and that's wonderful. The problem is that what the township needs is to know if they are going to have tours, how many buses are they going to have, okay? Because
How many buses are at a
Hawk,
church?
you know, I mean, Quiet Hawk said they wanted to have tours. These were all things that the zoning officer didn't create this information. This is what was given to him.
Well, thank you so much. And this is exactly why I said this is a teachable moment, and I framed it like that, because again, this is a whole new concept for us. And, you know, churches have food pantries. They have energy programs. They have literacy programs. Most of it is a lot of philanthropy involved as part of, you know, serving their Lord.
Mhm.
That is intrinsic to their religion. And to, you know, just even like honestly, even the museum portion, historic churches in New Jersey do have museums. They do have portion. Again, this is exactly why I said, ma'am, that this is a teachable moment. This is not condemning, saying like they're completely wrong. This is new. For us, it's new. This is a new concept. As far as like the buses and things like that, as far as that, again, with the house of worship, it's a house of worship. You know, that is what it is with that. And that's what the law says. It's all encompassing with it as well. And as far as all those uses, I'm getting, like, that's the same thing that has with churches around. I can't, again, like, who am I to say, and we can't preemptively be like, you can't be allowed to open up because we're afraid you're doing X, Y, and Z, or we don't know what your plans are. That's not how it works. That's what zoning violations are for. You know, if you have an issue with that, that's when you're like, you put a zoning violation in. You don't do it preemptively. That's all we're asking for, ma'am.
So what you're stating basically is you only want it to be a house of worship. So before you bring in schools, okay, or you bring in buses, you would notify the fire department so that they would be aware of the fact that this was there, okay? Because this is a volunteer fire company, this is volunteer EMS. We do not have a police force, and that is what basically we're just asking, because we want to protect not only the people that are at the church, but the people that they're bringing in and everyone in the surrounding area.
Much like look, I'm Jewish, right? And when I have to, unfortunately, they have police officers outside of synagogues now. So again, but that doesn't preempt, if for some reason it was to transfer to another synagogue or whatever, right? Those immediate needs of like fire departments, EMS, that doesn't, again, prevent people to continual use. That is, honestly, that is the discussion that you have during it. That's the community effort there. And honestly, I think that I would love for all these people to come, love to open up and for us to all learn about the history and the culture and the spiritual practice there. This is all part of just a community effort here. This is an ongoing conversation with that. And if the township feels like they are violating any of those zoning ordinances, that is for a violation, ma'am.
But already the township states that you have to come in front of the planning board with a site plan, okay? If this property has been vacant for 2 years, which this has been vacant.
So it's, according to also, as far as that, it's a continued use because it goes from user to user. As far as it was still owned by that church. It's not like it went to, I don't know, a warehouse, for example, and then went back to back to a sanctuary. It did. It stayed continuous. That's what we're talking here. It went from house of worship to continual house of worship. They got the property in August. That's where it starts. And if the township has an issue, that's what zoning violations are for. But you can't preemptively say you're not allowed to be here or you have to get an approval, even though the ordinances say you're not required to, because they're not expanding anything.
Council, I think the crux of the issue is, as you're framing it, that if you have prior use of religious use of this property, and say the nature of all of those other houses of worship didn't have buses of people and all that kind of thing.
They did.
But now yours is.
They did, and also that still goes on. It's not in your ordinance right now that shows and it still gets triggered by a change of use or expansion for the structure. It's none of that. They're not changing anything. That's all.
So the intensity of the use, let's just talk
The
about
intensity of
that.
use-
Let me finish my question. So the intensity of the use of this property is not going to change in any way, shape, or form.
No, it will be the same as the prior church and the church before that.
So whatever the prior church had as far as the number of people coming and going, the number of buses coming and going, all that kind of, will all be
Yeah,
the same.
it has a relatively very large parking lot right now, and I'm guessing that was because of the school buses. But again, this is not, that's exactly why, if that was to change, you know, the town is all in their right to serve a zoning violation at that point, if they desire to. But it's not to preemptively stop them from continuing the house of worship, or prevent them from using their house of worship, or requiring them to have a substantial burden that's different from Morningstar, different than Living Word. So treat it, like, this is no different than Living Word Ministries transferring ownership to Morningstar. That's it. It's a church to a church, house of worship to house of worship, house of worship to another house of worship. That's it.
But wouldn't your argument be at that point, that since no approval was required, you can basically do anything and increase the intensity of the property?
No, we're following what is already existing and what's right. It says it in the ordinance. We went through that. It says if it's a change of use or any sort of enlargement, that would trigger it. But we're not asking for that at all. We're just asking the continued use. That's it.
And do you believe that the township has a legitimate right to inquire as to the intensity of that use?
No, I think that it's the freedom of religion with that. I think that as long as if there's nothing within the code that says it's going to trigger from a change of ownership that triggers any sort of approval. We're talking about just a change of ownership right now. And then that would be the same thing as, like, say, I don't know, you went from a Chinese food restaurant to a pizza restaurant, and now suddenly the pizza restaurant is super, very popular. Am I gonna have to go in front of the board because it's the same, it's even though it's still a restaurant and it hasn't changed the use, it's the ownership, different food, still the same. Or hell, it went from one pizza place to another pizza place, and my pizza place happens to be super popular. Buses are coming in because it's amazing pizza. I don't have to go in front of the board because nothing has changed. Only thing changed is the change of ownership. Again, it's like we can't preemptively say you can't continue this house of worship here, or put a substantial burden on there, or limit their
what
religious
is-
practice.
So what is the threshold that you're indicating is an acceptable amount of traffic coming in and out?
Should be none of your business. It should be none of your business. That's what it should be. The government has their mind their own business. All of you.
Look, if they're
We're all full of shit.
That's not what we tolerate.
Just to make
What do
my
you wanna
question
do?
clear.
That's not right. Just
Shut,
say
you
that.
can be quiet. You
Just to
can
make
be
my
quiet.
question clear. Just hypothetical.
okay.
If the parking can accommodate 100 vehicles, are you indicating that just because it's popular using your pizza or Chinese, that it's then okay to consistently have 200?
If I meet the zoning requirements and the zoning is already existing, there's not any sort of change in the structure or change in the use, according to the ordinances, you are allowed, ma'am. Sorry, I called it ma'am. Sorry.
One of the things I was coming up with in hearing you talk, which was great, you know, I learned a lot in that.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is you're calling it a house of worship, and you want to do this and this and this and this and this. Like you want to have a visitor center, you want to have a museum. But if we relate that to your pizza shop, if that place was able to currently make 50 pizzas a day, and now you want to keep it a pizza place, you want to bring in better machinery and make 50,000 pizzas a day,
Well,
what's the difference?
pizza's not my religion. I wish it was, but it's not. So it's not protected under the Constitution. So that's exactly why we have the religious land use. And it falls under that. It falls under that federal law.
But when you list here museum,
We
are you saying
we didn't list the
10 foot?
museum.
Well, I'm just going off of the notes that were
That
provided from.
That was, and we put that in with our thing to disregard prior communication. We didn't get hired until after. Plans change all the time. They change all the time, and
Yes, but a
again,
museum is not a conforming use in that. So if you were saying, what if you made 90% of that building a museum?
it's, according to the federal law, there's been a lot of case law, even with museums, it depends, because if it's intrinsic to this use, and honestly, the Ramapos went the same thing with Mawa. This is what happened. It was with a polo club, right? And so it doesn't happen that much in New Jersey, but it's very, I hate to say very popular in the Midwest because there's a large amount of Native American population there. So this is not a new concept. That's exactly why this religious land use law is there, sir.
Right, and I completely agree with that. We just don't know how much is going to be, because it says school activities. How much school activities? Is it going to be a continuous 18 hours a day school activity?
You can't, but that's the thing though, you can't tell that ahead of time. That's why you can't govern that continued use. That's what the zoning, but that's why the zoning violations are for. I didn't see anything in the ordinance that would trigger that for there was nothing in there.
But if you list certain items,
We
certain
didn't
items are
list-
not conforming
Sir.
in other parts.
Sir, we didn't list those items in that when they changed, and additionally, those are all they're all under the umbrella of a house of worship. That's what the federal law says. I did not create that. That is what exists there. That's what the law is. Just like, again, I don't know how popular the Sunday schools are around here, or they have to go. And the thing is, but I would like to say that I would hope that there's just communication from all parties here. All we were asking for is a continued use. That's all we're asking for. If the township finds that we're in violation of any sort of zoning ordinance, then that, at that point, is appropriate to put a zoning violation. But you can't govern it prior to it. When it says in the ordinance, you have to, again, take the word, you have to, gosh, you should see what it is. We're saying it's a house of worship, then it's a house of worship. If the zoning officer or people decide and they find out that, I don't know, there's a giant rave or something crazy there and you put a zoning violation, that's a zoning violation then. That is the appropriate action there. You can't govern it prior to that.
So we can't ask questions of how much it would be used either.
Honestly, no, like that's what I didn't create the Constitution like that. So that's really what it is. It's been discussed throughout New Jersey. I'm just telling you what the law dictates. I'm saying with the continued use, just like I don't know how many people are going to live sometimes in a house, or if they change the ownership, right? I don't have to, if I buy a house from another person, do I have to go in front of the board? No.
But that's a different.
No,
that's
that
not
is,
a house
but
of
that's,
worship, that's a house.
but that's the issue. It's just we're just saying this is all about a change of ownership. That is it. That's it.
Larry?
I got a question for you. I don't know much about the Native American culture. And so what I would propose is try to get, do you guys have a mission statement? A statement that says what your church is actually, what's involved in your rituals and different things, so that would help end this.
Yeah, we actually did put that into.
Do you have something that you could share with the board here tonight that we can understand?
Yeah, we do have it. We included actually in our letter for asking.
This way, let me finish. This way we can understand exactly what you need.
Sure.
And what you applied for, then we'll know that there's differences.
Yep, sorry, we're getting it right now. We did submit this to part of our application. Sure, here it is.
Can you pass these out?
I think that's just one.
Oh.
It's just one. It's like what they believe the spiritual.
No, I'm talking about like what exactly is in their bylaws as far as what there be, in other words, what their religion involves as far as activities and
Here,
different
this is an
things.
example. They have a smudging ceremony. They have a healing circle.
One person speaks at a time.
What I'm trying to get at here is that we can end all this,
Yeah,
I
sir.
don't think anybody knows really what that religion involves.
We submitted it as part of our application, sir.
Why do they need to?
Would you like to see this?
No, he doesn't care. I don't know what 7 days do. I don't know what Presbyterians do. I don't know what Catholics do, and I'm Catholic.
Each organization has a mission statement.
Yeah, it's in there, sir.
And the mission statement tells them what they're all about, what they plan on, what their end goal is, and how they, what they're gonna do to get there. And like I said, that would probably explain to everybody exactly what's going on.
Thank you, sir. We actually did submit that.
Well, I didn't see it.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it's being passed around, but we did submit that even for a letter, and even the initial letter, we did put that in.
Larry and Andrew, do you have anything?
From a planning standpoint, and believe me, I think, Native American and rich cultural history of what a Native American process is rich to everyone, and it is a beneficial use. But the law and the zoning officer is doing his job. You come in with an application and say, I'm going to occupy a building that was abandoned from a church use and use it as a house of worship. He looks at it and says, I can't make that decision because the ordinance stipulates that churches are a conditional use. What he denied was permitted use and said you needed to file a conditional use application. You could ask, if you're not changing the site, you could ask for waiver of site plan. But all this discussion tonight is about who you are, how you're going to use the property, and does it satisfy with the written law of a conditional use. Then the board can make that judgment. The board never heard any of this till tonight, so I understand your presentation. I well appreciate what your intention of use to do. I mean, we know where we all came from. Who owned this land was Native Americans. Rich cultural, historical background. But going to the zoning officer and saying, I'm going to utilize a building that has been abandoned, is no longer a house of worship for this use, I believe his read was, you should go before the board and make your presentation. It would have been a simple application to the board to present pretty much what you've done. And then the board has an opportunity to ask questions. How are you going to use it? How many days, 7 days a week, 5 days a week, tours, museum? I mean, a lot of things that you say exist in your organization, I haven't heard.
Well,
And I'm just asking my opinion, I'm
that
just offering it from a land use perspective.
But my
The
question
statutes are
is,
set.
it's like, how are we not exempted underneath the ordinance where it says we didn't change, there's no change of use, sir? How does this not meet the exemption?
Because my opinion, is the zoning officer wasn't able to determine that just because it was previously owned and used by a house of worship, that any house of worship could come in without explaining how they were going to use the property. What if your congregation was 4,000 people?
Well,
Nobody knows that from what you said.
Excuse me. So, as again, what we said is that it's not changing anything. It's just, we're not changing anything else that was already pre-approved. Nothing. Any sort of look, when they went through, even though they didn't go for a board approval, they had to go for construction permits and for occupancy. That is not going to change, sir. And then additionally, it goes from, it was not abandoned. I know that's not abandoned because there's Abandoned Properties Rehabilitation Act and it's not on the list. It was still owned by the church, sir. And so, as far as that, it's not abandoned. It went from a house of worship to another house of worship. We're not changing anything. There's nothing that's going to be changed as far as the person. It's just still in the guidelines of the prior construction permits that were already given. They always say with how many people it can fit. Do they not? Of course they do. If for some reason a zoning officer was to say you have too many people in here, that's appropriate to put a zoning violation, sir. But as far as that, we're not changing the use. It's a continued use, and according to your ordinances, and according to also the municipal land use law, since it's not changing anything, we're not changing the structure. It's only a change of ownership. There is no requirement for a conditional use as well as a site plan approval. And as far as like the conditional use, to be honest with you, sir, I mean, look at what we're being subjected right now, trying to even explain what their religion is. How am I supposed to say, like, to have people say with like, how are you going to worship? How are you going to, that is not for us to determine what that is. However, you guys can make a determination from the construction code saying there's too many people here. It is too much over the load. That is totally in line with that. That's exactly what the construction code is. That's appropriate. But again, we're not asking, we're just saying a continued use. If there's anything to be said that you find that there's too many buses, too many people, there is something that is like against whatever, that do the zoning violation, issue fines. That is the appropriate action. That is what we're saying is appropriate action. It's not to preemptively say, you can't be here unless you do a conditional use. Again, that would align architectural plans, which are very costly. You'd have to do a completely different layout. They're using the existing layout that was already approved by the construction code. That layout that I showed you of the church, it's the same layout. That is it. It's not changing. So that is the difference. I'm saying that if you find that they violate anything, then put a zoning violation and put the fee and the fine to it. That would be the appropriate action. But right now, we're saying, like, they're allowed to continue the house of worship. From our view. But again, this is not meant to be adversarial. I'm not saying anything about the zoning officer because, again, this is a teachable moment. How often do you see a Native American sanctuary? In New Jersey, in the United States? Not very often. So that's exactly why I keep on saying it's a teachable moment, because it's not something that we see every day. It's not a Judeo-Christian that we're used to, how many things are here or that, or it's got to be this, or it's got to be that, that we're used to. We're not used to that. It's a different sort of definition, and it's been guided by the Constitution, the Religious Land Use Act. I'm not one to say how people practice their religion, but you as a township can say there's too many people here. This is out of scope of whatever you decide. You are totally in the right to put zoning violations in. That is what we're trying to say here, sir. Respectfully.
Like a year in the headlights.
Are you going to build a casino?
They're not federally recognized. No casinos.
So I just want to clarify something. So you're saying that it was always a church, and yet the person or the entity that purchased this property from Morningstar was the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. That is not a church, ma'am. That is a foundation, okay? That is not a church, and then they deeded it to the Native Americans. So it was not a continued use, which is what it's supposed to be when the ordinance states that it was vacant after 2 years.
So it was the same day when they transferred from the conservation to the association, and the reason why they did that is because thankfully the New Jersey Conservation Foundation receives a lot of Green Acres funding. That's a great thing that fortunately our taxes go to, where they are allowed to buy and preserve farmland. And they do this all the time, where they almost act like a intermediary. But that got converted like literally the day of. So they're just a vehicle to take that Green Acre money and to be able to put it towards other entities. And it was literally the same day. They had the Green Acre money, they purchased the property, they immediately gave it. It was never anything else, ma'am.
Okay.
They do great work. I think that you guys have a conservation area as well around here. Yes, they already have a conservation area.
Okay, so you're also saying it's a church and yet it's called a Native American Advancement Corporation.
Yes.
So just explain that to all of us.
All right. So, actually do know about, so I used to do work in Jersey City, and they had like this Episcopal corporation that would do affordable housing projects. There's different names for different entities all the time. That is just a vehicle where they wind up where we're calling it. And as far as like however they do, because it's such a wide range of uses, right? Of what the work that they do is pretty range. And by the way, a lot of that work that you were discussing on that article actually does not go on in that site, ma'am. It's in other places. So it's just another vehicle. It's another LLC, but it is part of their religion, much like, I don't know, was it Catholic Charities? So it's the same thing. Like, I'm sure you've seen like Catholic Charities LLC or whatever it is. They have these LLCs. Again, like this, this is why I keep on saying teachable moment, is because I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm not trying to say you're wrong, county. This is all of us learning. We're all learning together. This is a new concept for us.
Right.
So that's it.
So you're saying that this Native American corporation is in fact a church?
Yes,
Okay.
they do practice that.
I just want to make sure that everything is clarified on these minutes, okay? That the Native American corporation is a church.
Yeah, much like the Catholic Charities, the Catholics own a ton of property.
I'm Catholic, I understand.
You know what I'm talking about? Look, it's just different entities of how they name it, but it is a 501c3, and it does have with the religious institute. It does follow that, ma'am.
Okay.
Again, new concepts. This is a new concept for us. We're all learning.
Mr. Coe, is that everything in there that you need?
Yeah, I've seen this.
So, in other words, it doesn't have all the stuff in there that the Native American church is involved in?
Yes.
So what they're saying basically is that, what she's saying is the truth. That that's part of their religion, am I right?
That's what's represented.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the board members? Like to open up to the public?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ma'am, would you like to start us off with the public portion?
You have to stand up, you're gonna have to walk over here and give your name and address so that it is recorded, otherwise if you're here, it.
I got it. I'm not new to this game.
Okay, good. So, right past the microphone.
Right past the microphone.
Over here.
The United Methodist Church, my name is Miriam Jones. I live at 88 Quinton Hancock Swedish Road in Salem County, but Quinton Township. I lived here all my life. The Quinton United Methodist Church, all the Methodist churches in Salem County are incorporated. Conference, the United States, not United States, our conference, the New Jersey State Conference of Methodist Churches, made us incorporate back in 1940. I know this because I was the treasurer for 30-some years, and it had to be redone. So I know when it was incorporated. How come she said corporation, and you said it's not a church, it's a corporation? Well, if the United
I
Methodist
asked for
Conference,
clarification that it was a church. That's what I asked for, clarification.
but you can be incorporated to be a church.
Well, I asked for clarification, she clarified it, therefore everyone in this room, along with Melissa, the secretary, is able to put in the minutes that it is a church.
Okay, so what we do is our church, we're a church, even though we're incorporated. So why can't they be incorporated?
I didn't say they couldn't be incorporated, I was
But you
just,
just brought up corporation.
because that's what it states, and I wanted to confirm that it was a church.
Okay,
Okay, that was it, it's confirmation that it was a church.
well, I'm pretty sure it was a church. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this application? If not.
My name is Amy Soma. I live on 16 East Avenue in Quinton, New Jersey. I'm the daughter of 2 ministers, so I know a little bit about planning churches. I, for one, really like your idea. My father actually broke ground on Pastor Brian Donachie on Living Hope Worship Center in Swedesboro, New Jersey. Granted, he was not part of the building committee or had to do with any of the planning, but I can't imagine that they had to go through quite the interrogation of knowing what exactly how that church was going to be at the time. Given that the church that we have today looks very different, it has expanded quite a bit. I think what you're asking for is reasonable in that you were trying to work with what you got with the structure that you have. I support your outlook that if there is a concern that it will be addressed at that time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? If not, can I hear a motion to close the public portion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I got a question. How many people right now belong to that church? What is the number in the congregation?
About 25. About. How many's on? Yeah, we haven't even opened yet.
How many members? We need the brand new charter?
Yes.
Okay, I got you. How many members do you have right now?
We don't do membership. We don't do membership. That's not a part of our religion.
Well, how many people do you usually have at a sitting?
We haven't opened.
Yeah, but is there an average number?
Well, we will not exceed the capacity of 250.
I got it. The reason I'm asking is because the board has mentioned something about, a lot of people and buses and stuff. So I wanted to get peace of mind that your church wasn't a monster.
No.
We hope to have you there. If we get the board lost.
Is there any other questions?
Frame the issue for the motion? Yes, please. Okay. The issue before the board this evening came up somewhat unusually as a procedural matter. Ordinarily, if you had any other religious organization that would want to have a house of worship or any kind of facility, they would make an application, present the required information under the application, disclose things like the number of occupants and the kind of traffic and lighting that would be needed, the type of parking, handicap parking, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, with this application, what happened is that essentially an appeal was taken arguing about whether an application had to be made in the first place. And that's the procedural posture in which this came up. Instead of just filing an application, which would have been, as the planner had indicated, a relatively simple and straightforward application before this board, what we got bogged down into was an argument about whether they had to file an application at all. And that was the applicant's choice. They had that right to do that. But that's why procedurally we're at. The question before the board is, having now had a record made, representations made on the record, and questions asked, is whether based on the evidence that the board has heard, is whether a zoning permit should be issued for the activities that have been represented by the appellant. So that's the issue that is before the board.
I make a motion that we vote on to allow them to be a church. As she said 35 times, they just want to be a church. And if they do something outside of that, it is a zoning problem.
Just to be clear, is your motion a motion to approve the continued use as it has existed historically at the property?
Absolutely.
A second.
Roll call.
Now, what are we voting?
You're voting that the zoning officer will be able to give them a zoning permit in order for them to operate as a church. That's what you're voting on.
With the operation being as the historic use of the property has occurred.
Okay, roll call for appeal number 2023-03, Native American Advancement Corporation. John Allen,
Yes.
Cody Banks,
Yes.
Donald Brown has recused himself, Joseph Hannigan,
Yes.
Allison O'Boyle,
Yes.
William Remster,
Yes.
Marjorie Sperry,
Yes.
Suzanne Van Sciver,
Yes.
Larry Winkles.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.